Hi, everyone. Welcome to A New View. I'm Lee, and I'm here with Kim, Shira, and Juji. We are four friends, speakers, and professionals from different cultures, backgrounds, and age groups coming together to offer healing and inspiration. Do you ever think about who raised you and who raised them? Today, we are delving into the life stories of our ancestors, the good, the bad, and the ugly that shape who we become. Why is this important? Because when we hear the stories, we see the patterns. And when we see the patterns, we become aware and are able to break the ones that no longer serve us. So, my friends, who has a story about their ancestors that they want to share?
All right, I think I'll go first.
Great.
I actually really love this topic, mostly because a lot of us are either first generation immigrant or something along those lines. Um, and I've sort of shared this when I was talking about my life story, but it's very deeply ingrained in me that my parents are Hungarian. And they both grew up in a time of great turmoil in history in Hungary. There was communism in Hungary for a long, long time, and it's actually really confusing what communism is for most people because the premise behind it is that we're all equal and that we're all here to contribute equally to society, which is kind of a beautiful thought, right? But in practice, it's not really that sunny. So my father spoke of his father a lot when I was growing up. He respected his father, my grandfather, so much, who was a well-known dentist in Budapest. He had contributed writing to a lot of books. He taught dentistry. He was a very good dentist. And there's only a certain amount of money you could make in communism. Like there was a cap on how much you could earn because everybody is here to make an equal living, contributing to society. But that equal cap, that equalizing cap, didn't really allow for people to have a very good quality of life. So my grandfather was moonlighting in their basement, creating dentures for people, um, like illegally, basically. And all my father ever talked about when he was talking about my grandfather was like how hard he worked and how much he provided for his family. Now, the fact that they couldn't really talk about how much money they had because it was illegal is sort of a separate pattern. But right now, I think that what I really want to talk about is how my father's perception of work ethic really informed how he works. And he is a self-proclaimed workaholic. I mean, I worry about him sometimes because he just does not quit. He doesn't take a break, and he hasn't ever in my life. I can't really remember a trip that he's taken that wasn't directly tied to working. He's a mathematician. He's taught all over the world. He's world renowned. He's at the top of his field. It's very impressive, but it ingrained in me this sense of work is your value. Work is how you provide, it's who you are. It's his identity, his work. There is nothing beyond that for him. And while I respect very much his work ethic, uh, I was described as a workaholic from a very early point in my adult life, and I wore that with as a badge of honor, really. I was so proud of myself for how much my friends would talk about how hard I worked. My my friend recently reconnected with me and she was like, I remember you in our 20s, you were an animal, like 110 hours a week, overtime like crazy. I was the first person in the office, the last one to leave. You need extra work, I'll get it done. You know, like push it through, push it through. I'd work until I made myself sick. No more. That's the pattern I knew I had to break because it wasn't serving me. And I still struggle with that. I still struggle with like yesterday, I knew my body was telling me I needed a break. And so I was laying on the couch watching TV, being like, I should be doing something. I should be doing something. I should be doing something. And I was just like, no, mm-mm.
Wow. That's so fascinating. By the way, I'm also noticing how color coordinated we are. But anyway, it's like I was also thinking about my heritage on my father's side, because I think you've all heard me talk about my dad, who's a Holocaust survivor and basically lived in a hole in a mountain for 2 years at the age of 13. And I think he sort of has, I mean, obviously going through something like that will damage you emotionally, um, you know, just spiritually. My dad's come so far and he's, just dealt with so much. But I also know that he has this mentality of, I just have my little tiny hole in the ground and that's good enough. Like, that's all I need. It's fine. And he just never wanted for a lot. And he just did a lot of the same routines and patterns, etc. And so that's one of the half of, my parents that raised me. And I definitely have also sort of adopted this idea of, I don't need anything. I'm fine. Everything's fine, and you just have this sort of, I like the fact that I'm a minimalist, but I also want to experience all of the amazing, great things that life has to offer and not keep myself sort of in this little box. So that's a pattern that I am learning to, because, everything we talk about here is just over time. It's not like you've fixed the pattern and it's gone, boom, goodbye, never to be heard from again. It's like, it's going to rear its ugly head. So all of these patterns, but the thing is, when you're aware of them, you can not just change your thoughts, but change the behavior. And so I have opened myself up to trying more things and letting myself know that I deserve more and better, and, living my best life, etc. So it's all really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think we all have a lot of similarities. But Kim, did you have a question for?
I did, yeah. Well, I guess it's really to both of you. Juju, if you would go first. When did you notice this pattern?
Well, that's a great question, because what really comes up when you ask that is I was taught that if you just work hard enough, things are going to work out. Hard work, work ethic, that is literally the only thing that you need, and things are going to work out. And that did not happen in my business. I worked every single day, morning, noon, and night, 7 days a week, not a day off, and things did not work out. You can't work your way through something that isn't working. In fact, the working itself is what made me able to ignore some very important things about what wasn't working, because my head was down and I was just like, trying to busy my way through it. And that was when I realized that this pattern existed at all. I was just like, no, it's in my blood. I'm a hardworking person. I'm a child of immigrants. Like, my parents came here so that I could have a better life, this, that, and the other, like romanticizing this behavior, romanticizing the workaholism, and, having dark circles under my eyes and like barely being able to get out of bed in the morning. And I'm like, no, I actually do really want to get out of bed with a sense of purpose. And the purpose is so far beyond just work. That's the difference. Like, I appreciate that my father loves mathematics. I appreciate that he finds it his purpose in life to teach others what he knows. That is very honorable. I really respect him for that. I just know that for me, I need more of a breadth of experience in life than just my work.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think for me, it's was more about how this, like, I'm okay with my little, just like sort of putting yourself last. It infiltrates into other things, like the marriage, like my parents' marriage was like my dad didn't really talk about what he needed, and he just sort of settled for mediocrity in certain respects. And I think when in my marriage, I started to realize certain things also, like I'm just allowing certain things that are not in my best interest to take place. And so there's like pieces of the ancestry, the pieces of the story that, like, some of it unfolded earlier on, some of it unfolded while I was married. It's still unfolding, you know. So it's little snippets of aha moments that you just go, sometimes they just hit you like when you're not even expecting it. You're just like, oh, that's a lesson I learned from a long time. That's not working for me anymore.
You know what's interesting? For me, I just realized something. Just while you guys were talking, I just realized that there was a lesson I learned from growing up in my house with my parents, who basically in their childhood learned to not talk about anything. To, there could be this large pink elephant in the room and it did not matter. It was like, no, 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 it's not there. Sweep it under the rug. Nobody needs, there's no problem here. And that's how it was for me growing up. I learned to not talk about anything. And I'm just realizing now, so crazy, how I actually learned to break the pattern when I was young. Because at 16, that's an entire 16 years, and 16 is such an impressionable age. At 16, everything was bubbling up in me because I was living in an alcoholic home. My father was an alcoholic. There was tons of fighting, which I realize now was like traumatic and violent for me as a young girl. And there was all of this chaos. It felt unsafe, it felt unstable, and it was not spoken about. So at 16, all of a sudden it just was bubbling up. And like you said, Shira, in all different ways. I had a boyfriend that was terrible to me, just completely like emotionally abusive, cheated on me, just that whole piece. And then I had codependent relationships with friends, and I was just always looking for love from other people, and never knowing how to love myself. So it was, all this stuff was bubbling up for me, and I couldn't handle my emotions. And then my path thankfully led me to a therapist. Somebody brought a therapist to me, and as I started to talk to this therapist about things, it became very clear to me that my family was like this, that they didn't talk about anything, and that talking is medicine, which we say all the time, right? That lesson of talking is healing, talking is medicine, that actually came to me when I was 16. And I'm just realizing now at 40, almost 45, that, wow, I really did learn that lesson a long time ago. Thank God. Anyway, it's just something interesting that it just dawned on me, because I know that I talk now and it's very healing for me, and I'm all about that, and I teach that. But it just came to mind that, wow, I actually learned that when I was young, and I didn't really click.
I think we all have so many similarities. It's like I'm listening to you guys and your stories, and with every single one of you speaking, I'm like, yeah, me too, because first of all, our parents came from a whole different generation. We all grew up very differently, obviously. I too came from another country. My parents were immigrants also, but there is this like similarity with keeping things a secret. I think. Well, we had that also with a lot of things. Like I discovered as an adult in my 20s or 30s that in my mom's family they had other kids somewhere, and they didn't find out till they were older. There were things in the family dynamic that were just not spoken about. I remember also being younger and in my teens, my mother had this best friend who had cancer. She ultimately died of cancer, but I remember when I first asked, like, what is wrong with her? And she's like, oh, no, but we don't say that. And we don't, we don't say the C word. And I think life was just a lot more like that back then. And right now in life, just like you, Kim, discovering things, like there were things that didn't feel right. There were things that didn't feel like the right way to live or continue to feel or be that way. But I just could not identify these things in words. For example, like being vulnerable, that is okay. And and I didn't see any of that with my parents, and it's not because they didn't do anything wrong. They had no idea. They were clueless about that. My parents were uneducated, but they were some of the most also hardworking people in this world. And I think they felt like, coming to America and getting the American dream, it's like that's all that life was about. Kind of like Juji said, you just work your butt off and you can buy a house and a car and things, and that's it. Life is great. I mean, man, is that so untrue? Like, how many other things are we overlooking? Like, did people not realize, like, what about your relationships? What about your connections and all of this? So
And
I
your
really
health.
appreciate that there's so many similarities.
Yeah, and Lee, when you just made me realize, so my parents, grew up obviously with parents who didn't talk about things, because where did they get it from? And just last night, I was talking to my mom. I was telling her about this recording that we're doing today. And I said to her, I don't know anything about grandma and grandpa's experience with the Holocaust. All I know is that they escaped right as it was happening. My mom's entire family died in the camps. And I know it was just never talked about. And I said to my mom, I know that your parents were the only ones that survived, but did they never talk about anything with you growing up? And she was like, no, it was never talked about. They never went there. I don't know anything. And I said to her, that's really sad, because if they talked about it, I feel like that, they would have been more healing for them to sort of work through it. And when I look at my grandma and grandpa, my grandmother was a hypochondriac and spent most of her adult life in hospitals. So my mother grew up with a mother who was not stable at all and in hospitals every other week. And my grandfather, because of the hospital bills, he was constantly struggling to a point where at like 40 something years old, he had a heart attack and died. So, it just makes me wonder, with talking about what happened to their loved ones and all that pain that's stuck in their heart, could that have helped them? Could that have created a different future for them? And there's no doubt in my mind that the answer is yes. So I just, in sharing my story with you guys about the the secret life and not being vulnerable, not talking about anything, obviously, I'm seeing where it comes from. It's so clear. So I just know that I'm looking at my ancestry and what I know, it's nice to look at it, because it's reflecting something to me that I don't want for myself. I don't want for my life. I don't want for my family. I don't want with my friends. Like I want to be completely open and vulnerable and emotional. And because that's, to me, it's so healing.
Totally.
That's right.
Well, this is sort of strange, but I was watching Fame last night, and it was made in 1980, and two kids are talking to one another. They're in high school, and one kid says, well, my analyst says such and such. And the response was, you have an analyst? What's wrong with you? And I mean, that movie was made not that long ago, but the difference between what's wrong with you, you're in therapy, and what's wrong with you, you're not in therapy, like, is such a stark contrast. And, my mom is a therapist. She could tell that pattern of behavior of not talking about things, of the trauma that happened. My grandmother is also Holocaust survivor. They left and went to Australia, and the rest of their family is no longer. So the fact that that wasn't really something that they spoke about, my mom was like, no, I'm breaking this pattern, and I'm learning how to be vulnerable and tap into the unconscious part of myself. And I'm bringing that to my family. And so we all grew up talking about our feelings and all of that stuff. And there's kind of a joke like the kids of therapists are the most screwed up because they like kind of overanalyze you. And I don't find that to be true, by the way. I absolutely don't. There's so many other modalities that my mom brought to her home that were also very healing. But that doesn't mean that aren't some deep things that don't end up permeating without you even knowing that. You know, it's not like she ever sat me down and was like, just so you know, there's more to you than your work ethic. You know, because it didn't even occur to her that that was something that I was absorbing subconsciously. I didn't talk about it. I got good grades. Yes, I was ambitious. You know, she was proud of me for these things. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, it's such a tragedy that I was a workaholic. And no, no, it wasn't a tragedy. It was just a really, really big life lesson that I can trace back. And I know now that if anybody ever comes to me and says, yeah, you know, I feel guilty and I'm working all the time and this, that, and the other thing, I'm like, okay, I know where to start pulling that thread and start unpacking that with them because I lived it. And I can tell that this culture is it's very ingrained in the American culture of like work, 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 work. Burnout is not a thing, you know, like, and we're starting to talk about it. So it's all tracing things back, whether it's conscious or unconscious.
That's such good stuff, Zhuzh. I mean, I do think the world is changing a little bit. We hear more and more about how important mental health is, and there's more resources in corporations for mental health and well-being. But I wanted to say something really important, and that is that I just spent a week in Florida, and I saw my dad, who I haven't seen in almost a year. And I had these thoughts in my head of things that I wanted to ask him about my childhood, specifically the year that I lived in Israel when my mother took us there, and I didn't see my dad a whole year. And I've had like a general understanding of his perspective, my mother's perspective, you know, me as the person who was 9 years old living in a foreign country. I'm like, how did that all happen? You know? So I had all these questions, and I literally took my phone and I pressed record, and I did like a 45-minute session with my dad just a few days ago. And it was so amazing. It was so amazing. And we talked about other things too. And I was like, not only do I have his voice on my phone forever in perpetuity to hear him tell his side of the story, most of it I knew, but there were a couple of things I didn't know. Was so healing. And so I kind of like, as part of this episode, I want to encourage people to like, if you're dealing with things like you, Kim, who like, they never talk, like it's never too late to try to get the stories out of our ancestors, because once they're gone, they're gone. And, you know, we don't get another chance. So
I love that, Shira. And this reminds me of before my grandmother died, my mom's mom, who died many years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago. I recorded her one day because she's got a fascinating story and upbringing, which again also like takes me back to thinking, you know, few of you had, you know, relatives that were in the Holocaust, some talked about it, some didn't. My grandmother's story is so intriguing also, but it also puts me in a place in the way what I am grateful because I had a different upbringing, and my upbringing was not as uncontrollable as hers was. Right now, so she grew up in Iraq, but when she was 12, she was already, they found a match for her. So she was in an arranged marriage, and he was like 26, 27 already at that time. And they waited until her menstrual cycle before they actually could get married. And she wound up having 9 kids, but she was probably pregnant about 15 times. Now, I will say though, my grandmother and grandfather lived before they came to Israel, before they were forced out of Iraq, they lived a very cushy life. They lived in a castle, and they had, people serve them hand and foot. People cooked for them, cleaned for them, took care of the babies and the kids. So she didn't really have a hard life in that sense. But could you imagine being in your 12-year-old body and waiting to get married to a man like that's 20, almost 30 years old? Like, that is just, although it was the norm then. But I remember I interviewed her, same thing. I was like, I've got to, like, I don't go to Israel that often, right? I would go every 3 years or whatever. And I recorded her. So I still have that great memory to treasure, her voice. And actually, I have her on video. And so that's been great. And I've since sent copies to everyone in the family. We have a big family, but the diversity in the histories of our ancestors and our family is just, it's fascinating.
Amazing.
It's fun. I'm so glad you did that, Shira.
Me
I
too.
love everything that we've all learned from our ancestors and their stories, and seeing those patterns. It's life-changing. It really is.
One thing I do regret is not, my father passed away 26 years ago, long time ago. He was in his 50s, but he always used to tell me stories about being in the army and what happened and what he did. And I had no interest back when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, no interest at all. And then in my 20s, he died. And boy, would I have loved to just sit with him for just another hour, or, to hear those stories again. So yeah, if you can, do it. Do it.
Oh, I think that is such a fantastic place to wrap it up. It was so wonderful to talk about this. What a unique topic today. Well, if you loved our conversation as much as we did, definitely click subscribe to our channel, click like if you are enjoying all of our conversations, and be sure to let us know if you have any topic requests or questions. Just comment below. And we'll see you soon, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.